Nobody in the gym paid attention to the woman at the front desk. That was the thing about her. She did not pull attention toward herself, and she did not ask for it, and she seemed, in every observable way, to have arranged her life so that neither of those things would happen, even by accident. She sat behind the laminated counter on a rolling chair that squeaked when she turned, reading glasses resting on the tip of her nose, a pen clicking softly in her right hand in the slow, even rhythm of a person who is not nervous but simply accustomed to having something to hold. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, the kind tied without a mirror, and with just enough pressure to keep it from falling across her face. No product in it, no style intended beyond function. Her clothes were plain in a way that went past casual and into something closer to deliberate. A gray long-sleeve shirt with no writing on it, dark pants with enough room to move in, clean sneakers from a brand no one in the building could have named. She looked, from any reasonable distance, exactly like what most people assume she was, a middle-aged woman who had taken a front desk job because it paid the bills and asked nothing dramatic of her. Her name was Renata Cole. She was 44 years old, though nobody had thought to ask. The gym, a mid-sized mixed martial arts training facility on the south side of Fayetteville, North Carolina, had hired her 9 months before without much ceremony. She had come in, sat across from the owner at a metal desk, answered his questions in complete sentences without padding them, filled out the paperwork the same afternoon, and reported for work the following Monday. She had learned the scheduling software by her second day, faster than either of the previous 2 front desk staff had managed it. She arrived every morning 6 minutes before her shift began, not 5, not 7, 6, which suggested a commute that had been timed and a parking space that had been selected for efficiency. She had not called in sick once. She had not complained about the water cooler in the back hallway that had been broken for 4 months. She knew every member's name by their 3rd visit. She had a way of saying good morning when people walked through the door that made each person feel acknowledged without making them feel examined, which is a harder skill than it sounds. And rarer. Nobody in the gym knew what she had done before this. She did not bring it up. Nobody asked in a way that got past the surface. The morning that Darius Holt walked through the front door for the first time, Renata was entering membership renewal data into the computer, cross-referencing the printed list against the system screen, clicking with her mouse at the pace of someone who has found a rhythm and intends to keep it. She heard the door open. She heard the way the sound of the lobby shifted when he entered, the particular thinning and then reshaping of nearby conversations, the small adjustments people make with their bodies when someone with presence walks into a space. She had spent years reading rooms without looking at them directly. She did not look up. Darius was 27. He had the build that people described, depending on their level of directness, as either impressive or intimidating. Broad through the shoulders, narrow at the waist, with forearms that showed the particular density that comes from years of serious and sustained training, and hands that carried the worn texture of someone who had put them in gloves since early adolescence. He had been competing on regional kickboxing circuits for 4 years. His record was genuinely known in this part of North Carolina. Local sports coverage had followed his last 2 bouts. A few gyms in the surrounding area had his photograph pinned to a community board near the entrance. He carried the easy confidence that accumulates when a person is authentically good at something physical and is regularly and sincerely told so by people who admire it. He walked to the counter with the natural ease of someone who expects both service and attention when they arrive at a counter. Renata slid the sign-in sheet across without looking up. That small thing, a sheet moved toward him without eye contact, without a smile assembled especially for him, without the slight lift in attention that he had grown accustomed to from people in reception and service positions, settled on him like a small scratch. Not painful, just unexpected. He looked at the sheet. He looked at her. She was moving her eyes between the printed list and the computer screen, her lips forming the faint shape of numbers she was reading. He picked up the pen. He signed. He pushed the sheet back. She pulled it toward her, found his name in the system, clicked twice, and said without looking at him, and without any inflection that separated warm from cold, "You are in the system. Locker room is down the hall on the left. The back training room opens at 10 on Tuesdays." That was all. He stood at the counter for 1 second longer than the transaction required. People behind counters had a habit, when he came in, of adding something to the exchange. They asked if he had an upcoming event. They said they had heard about the regional circuit. They smiled with a particular brightness that signaled recognition. Renata had already returned to her screen. He walked toward the locker room. The three men who had come in with him had caught the exchange from a few steps back. Calvin, who had known Darius since their time in the same youth training program 11 years ago, who had the habit of watching interpersonal moments carefully and quietly. Nathan, who was quick to laugh and loud enough about it that his laughter often became the room's permission to laugh as well. And Marcus, who was the largest of the three and spoke less than anyone else in the group, and had a way of observing things with great patience. All three had seen the moment at the counter. They looked at each other briefly. Nathan's mouth formed the beginning of a grin. Calvin did not grin. Marcus looked at the door Darius had passed through. No one said anything. Renata clicked her pen once. She continued typing. Darius trained hard that session, the way he always trained, and when he left 2 hours later with his bag over one shoulder and a damp shirt, Renata was managing a membership issue on the phone, with a clear, unhurried voice. She did not glance toward the door when he passed. After the call ended, she noted his departure in the system and said, without drama, toward the door that had already closed, "Have a good evening," the way she said it to every person who left. He came back 2 days later. The four of them signed in, took their passes, and went to the training floor. Renata handled 3 arriving members, answered a question about the class timetable, and redirected a delivery to the back office, all in the time it took Darius and his crew to reach the locker room. She ran the desk the way a well-calibrated thing runs, continuously, without friction, without unnecessary motion. On that second visit, while they waited near the front area for the training floor to clear, Darius leaned one forearm on the counter. "Do you even lift?" he said. He said it with a grin. He said it in the tone people use when they want a question to work as a comment, when they want it to arrive like a joke and land like something with more weight to it, light enough to deny if called out, pointed enough to be felt. Renata clicked her pen. She did not look up. "I move around," she said. "Yeah?" He glanced sideways at Nathan, who was already starting to smile. "You move around to the refrigerator?" The gym was not quiet when he said it. There were other conversations and other sounds, but the people within range heard. Nathan made a sound that was almost laughter. Marcus looked at the far wall. Renata looked up. This was the first time she had looked directly at him, and she did it over the top of her reading glasses, in the specific way a person looks at a thing they have already processed and hold no pressing curiosity about. She looked at him the way a person looks at a calculation they have already run. She smiled. It was not warm in any conventional sense, but it was not cold either. It was the kind of smile that a person produces when they have been through harder things than the moment they are currently standing in, and have made their peace with the world regardless. A smile with no performance in it, which somehow made it stranger than either warmth or coldness would have been. There was nothing in it to grab hold of. She said, "The training room opens in about 4 minutes. She turned back to the keyboard. The small cluster of people close enough to have heard the exchange returned to their own business. The lobby returned to its regular ambient sound. But for a few seconds, in the immediate area around the counter, there was a particular quality of quiet that was different from the background hum of the building. It was the quiet of something that had not ended the way it was supposed to end. Darius pushed off the counter. He walked away. His crew followed. Calvin, at the back of the group, glanced at Renata once as they moved down the hallway. She had already picked up the phone. Her voice was steady, directed at something entirely unrelated. He did not laugh. He had not laughed once during the whole exchange. He walked slowly until he was level with Nathan, who was still grinning. Calvin put his hands in his pockets and said nothing, and the grin on Nathan's face faded by a degree, without Nathan knowing exactly what had changed. That was the first visit. The second added more. The third added more still. In the weeks that followed, Renata's mornings stayed exactly as they had always been. She arrived at 6:54. She brewed coffee in the small break room off the back hallway, using the thermos she brought from home, because the gym's coffee maker had, on her third day of work, produced something she had evaluated, sipped once, and concluded was not worth the effort of a second sip. She had made that decision once and not reconsidered it. She set up the front system, checked the overnight messages, confirmed the class schedule for the day, and opened the main doors at 7 on the second. She said good morning to every person who came through, and she said it the way people say things they mean, plainly, without decoration, and with the full attention of someone who considers a greeting a small but real act. Before any of that, between 6 and 6:45, before a single member arrived, she went to the small back mat room. This part of her morning was not listed anywhere, It was not a staff benefit or a facility perk. It was an arrangement she had made with Gerald in her first week, on the basis that she would arrive before opening time, use the room while it was empty, and leave the mat in better condition than she found it. Gerald had agreed without asking many questions, which was one of the things she had liked about him from the beginning. He had seen the lights on in the back room twice when he arrived early, and both times he had made a mental note to ask about it, and both times he had not asked, because whatever was happening back there was clearly not causing problems, and Gerald had spent 17 years in logistics learning that the best systems are the ones you confirm are working and then stop touching. What Renata did in that room during those 45 minutes was not what most people in the building did when they trained. She worked without music. She moved in sequences that were not designed around fitness outcomes or competition preparation. The drills she ran were built for situations that most people in that gym had never been in and would never be in, and which she had been in enough times that the sequences lived in her body, rather than in her mind, available without the delay of thought. She drilled for close range, for confined environments, for the moment after distance has already closed, and the only remaining question is how the situation ends, and who is still standing at the end of it. She had learned these things over 12 years in the United States Marine Corps. She had served in Force Reconnaissance, a unit whose specific work does not appear in most descriptions of the military because it is not the kind of work that benefits from description. It is the kind of work that requires a person to go in before others go in, to gather information, or complete tasks in conditions that are uncertain and dangerous, and remote from any meaningful support, and to function at a high level while being all of those things simultaneously. The training for this work is rigorous beyond what most military training encompasses, and it leaves marks on a person's body and nervous system and decision-making processes that do not disappear when the contract ends. Renata had left the Corps at 38, not because anyone asked her to, because she had decided, with the same directness she applied to everything, that she had done what she was built to do in that capacity, and that it was time to do something else. She did not frame this as sacrifice, and did not frame it as relief. She framed it the way she framed most things, as a decision that had been made with the information available, and that she was not going to revisit unless new information made revisiting necessary. She had chosen Fayetteville because she knew it, because the geography was familiar from years of proximity, and because her younger sister lived 40 minutes east, in a house with a yard and 2 dogs, that Renata visited most Sundays, arriving around noon and leaving before 5, drinking coffee at the kitchen table, and helping with whatever needed doing around the property. She had chosen the apartment because the rent was manageable against the pension she never mentioned, and the gym salary she was perfectly content with. She had chosen the front desk job specifically because Gerald had not asked, during the interview, anything that required her to describe herself in terms that would have felt like performance. She was content, not performing contentment, actually content, in the specific way of a person who has been in genuinely difficult places and has decided, on the far side of them, to appreciate the ordinary without making a production of appreciating it. Darius Holt was complicating the ordinary in a way she had not planned for. He came back for his 3rd visit, his 4th, his 5th. Each visit added something to what had started at the counter: a comment about her posture, a question about whether the gym offered beginner programs, said with his eyes on her in a way that made the target of the question clear. On his 6th visit, a Thursday, he came in with 4 members of his crew instead of the usual 3, and a 5th man she had not seen before, someone who trained elsewhere and carried himself with the posture of someone who wants rooms to register that they are physically significant. While signing in, Darius held the pen toward Renata and said, directed at the room more than at her, "She should be the one competing. Real warrior spirit right here." Nathan laughed. The visiting man laughed. Marcus looked at the counter. Calvin looked at the door. A young woman named Priya had come in early to collect her gym bag from the break room before her afternoon shift. She was standing behind the partition when this happened. She heard it clearly. She did not say anything in that moment. She found Renata in the back hallway 20 minutes later. "You do not have to accept that," Priya said. Renata looked at her. "Accept what?" "What he keeps doing. Every time he comes in, the comments. It is not acceptable." Renata tilted her head, the small tilt she used when she was deciding how long a response actually needed to be. "Has he broken equipment?" Priya stared at her. "No." "Has he created a safety problem for anyone in the building?" "Not technically." Then it is Tuesday, Renata said. What does that mean? Renata picked up the clipboard she had set down to talk. It means this is a regular day. People say things. Days come. We continue. She walked back toward the front of the building. Priya stood in the hallway with the gym bag hanging from her hand and thought about whether what she had just witnessed was a kind of strength she had not encountered before or something she did not yet have the experience to understand. She decided it might be both. She put the bag over her shoulder and followed Renata out, more slowly. The following Friday, Darius brought 2 additional men from another gym across town, guest passes. It was evident from their manner when they arrived that they had been briefed in advance. They signed in and looked at Renata the way people look when they have been told a joke is coming and are scanning the room for the punchline. Darius made a show of introducing them, named them, and then gestured in Renata's direction and said, "And this is our front desk warrior, keeps all of us very safe." The visiting men laughed. Nathan laughed. One person sitting in the lobby chairs, a woman named Donna who had been a member for 3 years and who was waiting for her daughter to finish a junior class, looked up briefly and then back at her phone with the careful disengagement of someone who has decided not to be in a situation. Renata placed the visitor passes on the counter. These stay on for the full visit. Have a good session. She had already turned back to the computer before the group finished collecting the passes. Gerald had been in his office with the door pushed mostly open. He had heard most of the exchange. He came out afterward and stood near the front desk without speaking for a moment. He was not a person who moved immediately toward confrontation. He was a person who moved toward the resolution of problems that had become undeniable. Renata did not look up. "I can speak with him," Gerald said. "About maintaining a professional environment." Renata glanced at him. "Has he violated a policy?" Gerald paused. "Not in a way I could cite formally." "Then I am fine." Gerald stood there. He had a problem and was trying to determine its exact nature. He had a member who was popular and visible, and who brought other members. He had a staff member who was performing her job with more consistency and precision than anyone he had employed in the 4 years he had owned this building. The popular member was treating the consistent staff member badly in front of other members. This was the problem. But it was the kind of problem where each individual element had an argument for being left alone. "He is one of the more visible people we have," Gerald said, not defending it, just stating it. Renata looked at him, the patient look, not angry, not resigned, the look of a person who has considered all available information and arrived at a position she does not intend to be moved from by anything short of a genuinely new argument. "I know who he is," she said. "I can manage Tuesday, Gerald." He did not know what Tuesday meant. He would not ask. He went back to his office. He sat at his desk and looked at the papers on it without reading them. He had a low-grade feeling, the kind that comes when a situation is currently fine and you suspect it will not remain fine, and you cannot see the exact shape of what comes next, only its outline. 3 days later, the outline arrived. It was 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, which was either a coincidence or not, and the gym was at its most populated point of the day. The main training floor had approximately 30 people on it. In the far corner, a junior class of 8 children in matching gray shirts was finishing its session with their coach, a patient man named Greg who had been teaching kids the fundamentals of grappling for 6 years, and who had the kind of voice that made children listen without making them afraid. Along the bag line near the windows, pairs of members were working drills. 2 people near the back were resting between rounds and talking quietly. The room was full of the low hum of bodies in productive motion, the particular ambient sound of a space functioning as it was designed to. Darius came in with his crew. He signed in at the counter quickly, barely pausing. Then he stopped. He stood at the edge of the lobby and turned to face the front desk. Renata was helping a new member fill out his joining paperwork. The new member was a young man named Owen who had relocated to Fayetteville 6 weeks ago from a smaller town inland, who did not know anyone in the city yet, and had come to the gym because he had decided that was how he would begin to build a life here, by going to a place where people came to work at something. He was nervous in the mild, manageable way of a person doing something ordinary for the first time. Renata was explaining the cancellation policy with the same clarity she used for everything, pointing to the relevant line on the form and not rushing him. Darius waited for the explanation to end. He let her finish. Then, from where he stood in the middle of the lobby, in a voice pitched to carry without becoming a shout, he said, "Hey, you want to spar?" The training floor did not go quiet immediately. It quieted in sections, the way sound falls away from a source outward, conversations dropping off one by one as the question reached them. Renata looked up. "I am working," she said. 15 minutes, Darius said. "Light contact. I will take it easy." He had the smile on, the one that meant he already knew how this ended, and was simply waiting for the formal beginning. 2 phones were already out among his crew. The men near the bag line had stopped their drill and turned to watch. Greg's junior class had sat down along the wall, the children in their gray shirts watching with the sharp attention children pay to things they sense are significant but cannot name. Gerald had come to the doorway of his office. Priya, arriving slightly early for her afternoon shift through the back entrance, stopped near the partition and crossed her arms. Calvin was standing against the far wall. He had not taken his phone out. The room was waiting. Renata looked at Darius. She was not looking at the performance he was producing for the room. She was looking at the actual situation, which was a room full of people, a person who would not let this be resolved quietly, and a set of available options that had, one by one, been removed. She looked at Darius Holt and she ran through the options the way she had been trained to run through options, quickly and without sentiment, and she found that the ones that did not involve this also involved becoming smaller than she intended to be in front of people she respected. She set down her pen. She said, "Are you sure?" 2 words, no edge in them, no pause held for effect, no weight that she had chosen to add. Just the words, flat and direct. The way words come out when a person has no theater left in them and is simply asking a question that needs an answer. Darius laughed. "Yeah," he said, "I am sure." Renata looked at Gerald. Gerald gave a small nod. She reached under the counter. She took out a plain canvas bag, old, the handles worn smooth at the grip from years of use. She set it on the counter. She unzipped it. She reached inside. She took out a mouthguard. It was old, the kind of old that comes from years of honest use. The color had been worn away. The shape of it had been pressed and held and worn into the specific form of one set of teeth over a great many sessions. She put it in. The motion was automatic, not performed. Automatic in the specific way that motions become automatic after they have been done more times than the conscious mind can track, until the body owns them entirely. Mouthguard to hand to mouth, jaw adjusting, settled, the way a person who has put on a seatbelt 1,000 times puts on a seatbelt, without a thought. Darius had been smiling. He stopped smiling. Not because he was afraid. He had not arrived at afraid. He stopped because that motion, a mouthguard going in with that particular automatic ease, had cut a small hole in the story he had been telling, and through the hole came a draft of something he could not name, something that was colder than the room and not related to temperature. Calvin, against the far wall, watched the mouthguard go in. He watched her zip the bag closed. He thought about something. She walked toward the mat room. She walked the way she always walked, to every place she went, at her own pace, with her own direction, without performing either confidence or indifference. Owen, the new member, still held his pen above the unfinished form on the counter. He watched her go. He did not know what he was watching, but he knew he was watching something. The mat room at Gerald's gym was not large. At full capacity it held perhaps 8 pairs of people working simultaneously, with enough room between pairs that swinging limbs did not intersect. It was a functional room, not a beautiful one. The walls were padded from the floor to shoulder height, gray foam that had taken years of contact and shown it. The floor was rolled rubber mat over concrete, dark blue with white boundary lines worn to near invisibility at the center where most of the work happened. The lighting was overhead fluorescent, the kind that shows everything without flattering anything. When Renata walked through the doorway, the room had approximately 25 people in it, most of them having come from the training floor when word moved through the gym the way word moves through enclosed spaces where people share air and proximity. Someone had pushed a bag rack against one wall to clear the central viewing area. Someone else had propped the door fully open with a wedge from the supply cabinet. The junior class kids, still in their gray shirts, were seated along the wall near the door with their coach Greg standing in front of them in a posture that was clearly intended to serve as a buffer between what they were about to see and whatever it was going to be. Renata stepped onto the mat. She went to the far side, turned, set her feet. She raised her hands in front of her face. Not in a competition stance, not a kickboxer stance, a basic, efficient guard, hands up, weight slightly forward, balanced, waiting. She looked like someone who has decided to wait comfortably, rather than someone who has decided to wait with anticipation. Darius came in behind her. He had taken off his training jacket in the lobby. His shirt had the name of a regional competition printed across the back in block letters. He came through the doorway and stopped briefly to roll his wrists, letting his knuckles pop in sequence, and then rolled his neck to one side and then the other. These were genuine pre-training preparations. They were also performances, the kind that happen when a person is being watched and knows it, and is accustomed to being watched, and has incorporated performance into the preparation without entirely separating the two. He was not putting on a show dishonestly. He was simply a person who operated in a certain mode when rooms were full and eyes were on him, and the room was full and the eyes were on him. He stepped onto the mat. He looked at her across the blue floor. She looked back. The room was quiet in the way that rooms with 25 people in them are rarely quiet, which meant this was a genuine silence, actively maintained by people who had decided without discussion that talking would be wrong. Priya stood in the doorway with her arms folded across her chest. Her face was doing something she was not fully controlling. She was not afraid for Renata. She was afraid of what she still did not understand about Renata, which was a different kind of afraid, and harder to resolve. Calvin stood against the near wall, slightly back from the rest of the crowd. He had his arms at his sides. He was watching Renata's hands. He had spent 4 years watching Darius Holt in training and in competition, and he knew what trained hands looked like before a bout began. He knew the way a trained fighter's weight distributed when they were ready. He was looking at Renata's hands and her weight distribution, and he was looking at them with the part of his brain that had been developed by years of proximity to serious training, and what he saw was making him stand very still. Nathan had his phone out. He held it up. The camera was on. Gerald stood in the doorway, his hands in the front pockets of his trousers. He looked like a man who has made a decision he cannot unmake, and is now doing the only remaining thing available to him, which is watching. Owen was still in the lobby. He had followed the crowd as far as the mat room doorway, but had not pushed inside. He stood at the back of the group with his pen still in his hand, and his joining form half filled in on the counter behind him. He was watching the 2 people on the mat, and he was thinking that he had, by some combination of timing and chance, ended up at exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, though he could not yet have said why. Donna, the member who had been waiting for her daughter's junior class to end, had stayed. She stood near the wall with her daughter, who was 7, and wearing a gray shirt, and who had her mother's hand, and was watching with the wide, still attention that children give to things that feel important. Darius raised his hands. He moved forward. He closed the distance between them at a measured pace, not rushing, the approach of someone who is comfortable with what is ahead and sees no reason to hurry it. He came into range. He threw a jab, a real jab, not a testing probe, a genuine strike from a trained fighter who has thrown that strike tens of thousands of times, and whose muscle memory executes it with the precision of something that has been drilled past the point of thought. It was a good jab. Anyone watching would have confirmed it was a good jab. It landed on air. Not because she had moved dramatically, not because she had done something athletic and difficult to execute. She had moved by a fraction. A small, precise fraction that relocated her head by exactly the amount necessary to change what the jab found at the end of its extension. The fraction was not more than that, not 1 millimeter beyond what was needed. Nothing performed, nothing extra. He threw the combination that followed the jab, the one his training had built into the same sequence, the cross behind it, the hook that came off the cross. These were real strikes too, and they were well-timed, and they went to the places a well-trained fighter sends them, and they found nothing there. Because she was not in those places, she had moved again, the same quality of movement, small, precise, not reactive in the way most untrained people move when something comes toward them, pulling back and away and losing balance. She moved the way something calibrated moves, finding the position that takes the incoming force and gives it nothing to land on, and doing it without the appearance of effort, because the effort was in the years behind it, and not in the moment itself. Darius's combinations continued. They were good. They were genuinely good, the product of a serious athlete who had spent years building something real. And with each one, the same thing happened. The target was not where the strike expected it to be, by a fraction. And then there was a moment where his body had committed to a direction, and his balance had followed it. And in that moment, something changed. She was no longer in front of him. She was beside him, close. Closer than the distance a kickboxer expects to find an opponent, The distance was wrong. And in the wrong distance, her hand found his arm, not grabbing in the way that suggests strength but guiding, the way water guides a stone, following the direction the arm was already going and adding to it, bending it past the arc it was designed to travel, until it arrived at an angle the arm did not want to occupy. The angle communicated directly to his body, not to his mind, not to his pride, but to the body itself, in the language the body understands without translation: yield, or the thing that happens next will be worse. He went to the mat. Not explosively. Not dramatically. Not in the way that competition athletes fall when a throw is completed with force. He went the way water goes when a drain opens, following the only available path, the one that had been prepared for him in the geometry of the previous 2 seconds. The mat received him. His arm was held. Pressure was being applied to the joint at a specific point and in a specific direction, methodically, increasing in small increments. His elbow was in a position it was not built to occupy. The message from that position was clear and immediate and left no room for interpretation. He tapped. The open palm of his free hand came down on the mat twice. Clear, decisive. She released him. She stepped back. She was standing at a normal distance from him. She took the mouthguard out of her mouth. She held it in her right hand. The room held its breath for 2 full seconds. Darius sat up. He sat on the mat with both hands on the floor beside him and looked at the space directly in front of him, not at her, not at the room. His expression was moving through things rapidly, the way a face moves when several significant experiences arrive at the same moment, and the face does not have the architecture to process them all at once. There was confusion. There was the beginning of embarrassment, not fully formed, still assembling itself. There was something underneath those 2 things that was harder to read, something that lived in the jaw and the set of the eyes, and was not anger, but was adjacent to it, the way a shadow is adjacent to the thing casting it. He sat on the mat. Renata was looking at the mouthguard in her right hand, turning it slightly between 2 fingers, not triumphantly, not even with particular attention, more in the way a person holds a small object when their mind has already traveled to the next thing and their hand has not caught up yet. She was already somewhere else in her thinking. That was the part that reached the room before anything else did, not the 37 seconds, not what she had done or how she had done it. The part that reached people first was the way she was standing after it, which was the same way she had been standing before it, the mouthguard in her hand, the neutral set of her face, the sense, unmistakable and impossible to articulate, that she had done the thing required and moved on from it, before the room had even finished witnessing it. Warren was a man in his late 30s, heavy-set, a member for 2 years, who had refereed amateur competitions on weekends for a long time. He understood what he had just watched. He understood it technically, and he understood it in the larger sense that some people have when they see a level of training they have rarely been in proximity to. He turned to the man beside him and said something very low. The man beside him heard it and repeated it to the woman beside him. The woman repeated it to the person she had come in with. Who is she? Who is she? Who is she? The question moved through the room in the particular way that questions move when everyone is already thinking the same question, and the first person to say it aloud gives everyone else permission. Gerald was in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. He heard the question from 3 directions almost simultaneously. He let out a slow breath. He said it quietly. But the room was the kind of quiet where a quiet voice reaches everywhere. Force Recon, he said. Marine Corps, 12 years. The room received this. For a moment, nothing moved. Then people began doing the quiet, private calculation that follows when a piece of information reorganizes everything that came before it. 12 years of force reconnaissance. The mat room with the lights on before 6 in the morning. The mouthguard that went in without ceremony. The way she had moved on the mat, with no drama and no effort and no excess. The way a very experienced thing moves when it is doing something well within its range. The comments at the front desk over the past several weeks. The smile that had no performance in it. Every piece of it was arriving differently now. The way a sentence you read too quickly reads differently when you go back and give it its full weight. Priya's hand had come up to cover her mouth. She was not in shock. She was in the specific state of a person who has been hearing a long and complicated sentence being built over many weeks and has just heard the final word that makes every previous word suddenly and fully clear. Calvin was not looking at Darius. He was looking at the mat, the spot where Renata had been standing. He thought about 6 weeks earlier. He had come in before opening time to collect something he had left behind, and the lights had been on in the back mat room. He had assumed paperwork. He had walked past without investigating because the assumption was easy, and he had not been curious enough to test it. He thought about that assumption now. He thought about what the assumption had required him not to see, and what not seeing it had allowed, and whether those things said something he was going to have to sit with for a while. Greg had his arm extended in front of the junior class kids, not touching any of them but creating a clear boundary. The kids were watching quietly. The 7-year-old girl who was Donna's daughter was watching Renata walk off the mat with the steady, unblinking attention that children pay to people they recognize as being a certain kind of serious. Renata walked past the crowd. She walked the same way she walked every morning from the parking lot to the front door. Not slowly, not fast, at her pace, her own direction, with nothing being performed. She went back to the front desk. She sat down in the rolling chair. It squeaked when she turned. She put on her reading glasses. She picked up her pen. She clicked it once. Nathan had lowered his phone somewhere in the middle of the 37 seconds and had not raised it again. He stood near the mat room doorway now with the phone hanging at his side and looked at the lobby where Renata had returned to the desk. He thought about every time he had laughed. He thought about the times he had handed Darius the opening by laughing first. He was not a reflective person by habit, but he stood there now and did the reflection anyway, without being asked, because the moment demanded it. Darius was still on the mat. He had brought his knees up and was sitting with his forearms resting on them, looking at the floor. He was not injured. Nothing had been done to him that would leave a physical mark. He was a genuinely trained athlete who had been controlled by someone with a different kind of training, and the experience had taken something from the story he had been telling himself, and he was trying to locate the version of the story that remained. He looked at the doorway. The desk, through the lobby, was visible from the mat room door. Renata was sitting at it. She was typing. He looked at her for a moment. She did not look up. He looked at the floor. Owen, still in the doorway with his pen, watched Darius on the mat and then watched Renata at the desk. He made the decision, in that moment, that he had moved to the right city and chosen the right gym, and that whatever it cost to belong here was worth paying. Donna's daughter tugged her mother's sleeve and said, in the honest and direct way that 7-year-olds communicate, she did not even look angry. Donna looked at her daughter. Then she looked at the desk. No, Donna said, she did not. The video moved the way certain videos move, not because they are flashy or dramatic or contain something new, but because they contain something true, something the viewer recognizes as real before they have finished watching it, and recognition at that level travels faster than opinion. 2 clips existed. The first had been taken from the side of the mat room by a woman named Sandra, who had been a member for 14 months, and who had started filming when Darius issued the challenge, and had kept filming through the 37 seconds, and then stopped when Renata walked off the mat, not as a deliberate choice, but because her arm had lowered without her directing it to. The second clip had been taken from an angle behind Darius's left shoulder by Marcus, who had not intended to film anything, and had only raised his phone out of the same automatic impulse that had made Nathan raise his, and who had stopped earlier than Sandra, but had captured the tap and the moment immediately following it, including Renata stepping back and looking at the mouthguard in her hand. Both clips were uploaded before 9 that evening. Neither person who uploaded them had coordinated with the other. Neither had added commentary. One had cropped the clip slightly. The other had uploaded it as is. Neither clip was more than 45 seconds, including the time before Darius raised his hands. By midnight, both clips had left the local sharing patterns that normally contained regional gym content. By the following morning, the numbers on both had passed the threshold where an algorithm begins to actively carry a video into feeds that were not looking for it. By the following afternoon, the clips had traveled into communities that had no geographic connection to Fayetteville, North Carolina. Martial arts discussion groups, veterans communities, general interest feeds, the wide flat surface of the public internet, where anything that feels true gets passed hand to hand without anyone deciding to pass it. The comments arrived in predictable waves. The first wave was surprise. The second wave was the particular form of performed non-surprise that people produce when they are surprised but have decided that being surprised says something unflattering about them. So they produce instead the tone of someone who has always known this kind of thing was possible and is mildly pleased that it has now been demonstrated. The third wave was information, people who knew about force reconnaissance, and wrote about it with the flat, detailed precision of people who have direct knowledge. These comments were shorter than the others. They contained more facts and fewer exclamation marks. Several were written by people who had served or who had worked alongside people who had served, and these comments had a particular quality, a directness, and an absence of theater that made them easy to distinguish from the others. Veterans wrote the shortest comments. Some were a single sentence, some were 2 words. All of them were accurate. Darius Holt went quiet. He was not a private person in general terms. He had a maintained public presence and was accustomed to engaging with it. In the days after the video spread, he posted nothing. He responded to nothing. He was tagged in comments under both clips and under several subsequent posts by people who had seen the video and were discussing it, and he acknowledged none of them. His entries in Gerald's gym sign-in log stopped appearing on the day after the incident and did not resume. Whether he had transferred his membership to another facility or had simply stopped training during this period, Renata did not know. She had not tracked his departure from the log. She had other entries to manage. Gerald received 11 calls in 4 days, 3 from local press, 2 from regional sports media, 1 from a podcast about combat sports with a significant audience, 1 from a documentary production company based in another state, 3 from members or former members who wanted to comment on the situation, 2 supportively, and 1 to complain that the gym had hosted something irresponsible, a claim Gerald found strange enough that he spent several minutes after the call trying to determine what, specifically, the caller felt had been irresponsible and could not arrive at a satisfying answer. He declined the podcast and the documentary production inquiry. He gave one quote to a reporter at a regional online publication. He said that Renata was a valued member of his staff, that her background prior to the gym had always been her own private information to share or not share as she saw fit, and that the gym was proud of all its members. He used the word proud and then thought about it afterward and decided it was the right word. He did not name Darius in the quote. The article ran 2 days after the video began its main spread and was shared a moderate number of times, less than the videos but more than the gym's usual content. The gym itself was different in the days that followed, in a way that was difficult to make precise. The same people came, the same sessions ran, the same sounds filled the building, but the social geometry of the lobby had shifted in a way that everyone felt and no one discussed directly. People who had been members for years and who had seen Renata at the desk every day they came in, stopped at the counter now with a different quality of attention. Not pity, not congratulation, something closer to seeing. The way you look at something you have passed every day, and then one day look at it and understand you had not actually seen it before. Donna came in on the Thursday of that week. She signed in and stood at the counter for a moment after Renata had processed her entry. "My daughter asked about you," Donna said. "She wants to know what you are." Renata looked at her. "What I am?" Those were her words. She is 7, and she is direct. Renata considered this. "Tell her I am someone who showed up and did the work." Donna looked at her. "That is a good answer." "It is the true one," Renata said. Donna picked up her bag. She was almost to the training floor entrance when she stopped and turned back. "She also said she wants to do what you do." I did not know what to tell her. Renata thought for a moment. "Tell her to start by showing up." Donna nodded. She went to train. On Friday morning, Calvin arrived alone again. He had been coming in without the crew for the rest of the week, which was new. He signed in. He stood at the counter. He put the pen down. He said, "I looked it up. Force reconnaissance." Renata looked at him. "The selection process," he said. "What is required to pass? The operational roles." He paused. "I did not know much about it before." "Most people do not," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He had the manner of a person who is trying to say something honest and who wants to say it accurately, and knows that accuracy in this case requires more care than most conversations ask for. "I did not do enough," he said. He did not elaborate. He did not qualify it. He said it and left it where it was. Renata looked at him for a long moment. "You are doing something now," she said. He picked up his bag. He walked toward the training floor. He trained that morning with a focus that Greg, who was on the floor early for a class, noticed and mentioned to Gerald later in the day. Gerald nodded and said nothing. Nathan came in that same morning, an hour after Calvin. He signed in and stood at the desk and looked at the counter rather than at her. He did not say anything for a moment. "I am sorry," he said finally, "for laughing." Renata looked at him. She clicked her pen once. "Thank you," she said. She said it plainly, not warmly and not coldly, the way a person receives an honest thing. He nodded. He went to train. Marcus came in that afternoon. He signed in. He said, "Good afternoon." Renata said, "Good afternoon." He went to train. This was, she understood, as close to an accounting as the group would produce, and she found it sufficient. She had not been waiting for the accounting. She had not been tracking toward it. But when it came, she accepted it for what it was, which was 4 people doing the thing that was available to them, and that was worth accepting. What she was more occupied with, on the practical level of managing a busy week at a front desk that had suddenly become a subject of external interest, was the volume of incoming inquiries. New membership questions had more than doubled. Several people who called mentioned having seen a video. She answered each inquiry with the same information she always provided, and did not address the video unless directly asked. And when directly asked, she said she was not able to speak to it in detail, but that the gym was a good facility with good people, and she would be happy to arrange a tour. 3 people arranged tours that week, who mentioned explicitly that Renata was the reason they had decided to visit. She gave all 3 tours personally when she could, walking them through the facility with the same clear and informative manner she used for every tour, covering the class schedule, the equipment, the membership options, and the parking arrangement at the back of the building, which was a detail she included because the parking situation at the back was genuinely better, and she felt people should know about it. Gerald watched one of the tours from the edge of his office doorway. He watched Renata lead a young woman named April through the facility, pointing out the mat room, explaining the junior program schedule, noting that the back parking was preferable on busy afternoons. He watched her answer April's questions with the same precision and patience she applied to everything, and he thought about the first interview, 9 months ago, when she had sat across from him at the metal desk and answered his questions in full sentences, and he had hired her on the spot without entirely knowing why, and he thought now that he knew why, and that it had been one of the better instinctive decisions he had made in 4 years of running a gym. He went back to his office. He made a note to look into what a senior front desk role would mean structurally, and what he could do about the salary, and whether there was a title that fit what she actually was to the operation, which was something considerably more than the front desk job description had anticipated when he had written it. Priya had her afternoon shift as usual through all of this. She worked the desk alongside Renata when the overlapping hours allowed it, and she watched Renata handle the increased call volume and the tour requests, and the members who came in with a new quality of attention, and she thought about the conversation in the hallway, where Renata had said, "It is Tuesday," and Priya had not understood it. She thought she understood it now, not because she had gone through what Renata had gone through, or anything approaching it, but because she had been watching someone operate at a level that made the ordinary extraordinary by treating the extraordinary as ordinary, and there was something in that observation that changed the way she looked at Tuesdays. On the Friday afternoon of that week, when the day's last session had ended, and the gym was quieting toward close, and the evening light was coming through the front window at a low, warm angle, Priya and Renata were both at the desk, running through the end-of-day checklist together. Priya said, without preamble, "How do you do it?" Renata entered a figure into the system. Do what? Not get tired. Buy it. Renata considered the question honestly. It deserved an honest answer, rather than a performed one. "I have been tired by harder things," she said. "Once you have been tired by a harder thing, the lesser thing is still tiring, but you know it is lesser. Knowing the size of something helps with carrying it." Priya thought about this for a while. She entered her own figures into the system. The keys clicked quietly. "Is it always going to feel like this?" Priya said. "Like people look at you and see something smaller than what you are?" Renata looked at her over her reading glasses. "Often," she said. "Does that get easier?" "It gets more familiar," Renata said, "which is a different thing, but it can work the same way if you let it." Priya nodded. She finished her entries. She pulled on her jacket. "Good night, Renata." "Good night, Priya. Drive carefully." Priya left through the front door. Renata heard the car start in the lot outside. She entered the last of the day's numbers, ran the closing report, checked that the back mat room light was off, confirmed the thermostat setting for the overnight, and locked the system. She stood at the front counter for a moment in the quiet gym. The evening light was still coming through the window, softer now, reaching the far side of the lobby floor, in a long stripe of gold-tinted ordinary. The chairs along the wall were empty. The sign-in sheet for tomorrow was already printed and waiting in its slot. She picked up her thermos. She picked up her bag. She turned off the front desk lamp. She walked to the door. She went through it. She locked it behind her. The parking lot was quiet in the way of parking lots at the end of their useful day. Her car was near the back, where the spaces were easier. She walked to it. She got in. She sat for a moment before starting it, not thinking about anything particular, just being where she was, in the quiet of the car, in the quiet of the evening, in the quiet life she had come here deliberately to build. She started the car. She drove home. The journalist who eventually reached Renata did so through a chain that began with the gym's general contact form, moved to Gerald, who forwarded the message with a brief note that said he had no opinion either way, and that it was entirely her decision, and ended with Renata reading the email at her desk on a Tuesday morning and deciding, after a brief deliberation, to call the number provided. The journalist was a woman named Claire Alderton. She had covered veterans issues for 6 years for a publication that had a moderate readership and a reputation for accuracy, which she valued more than either reach or recognition. She had developed, over those 6 years, a particular skill that was not widely discussed in her profession, but was perhaps the most important one: the ability to sit with silence on a phone call without treating it as something that needed to be resolved. She had learned this from a veteran she had interviewed 4 years earlier, who had paused mid-sentence for 45 seconds and then said the most important thing he had said in the entire conversation, and she had almost interrupted the pause, and then had not, and had been grateful ever since. She answered on the second ring. Renata identified herself. Claire thanked her for calling and said she was glad to have the chance to speak with her. Renata said it was fine. There was a brief pause. Claire asked how she was doing. Renata said she was doing well. Claire said that was good to hear. There was another pause, not uncomfortable. Claire did not try to fill it. She asked if Renata would be willing to share something about her background and about how she had experienced the attention following the video. There was a pause on the line. Claire noted the quality of it, not a hesitation, not uncertainty, but the deliberate pause of a person deciding not which words to use, but whether the question being asked was the one they wanted to answer. Renata said, "I would like people to take away that I am good at my job. The other thing was Tuesday." Claire waited. There was nothing more. She said, "Could you tell me a bit about your time in the Corps, or about what you have been doing since?" Renata said, "I think that covers it." Claire said, "All right, I appreciate you taking the time." Renata said, "Take care of yourself." The line went quiet. Claire sat at her desk and looked at her notes, which contained 2 sentences. She thought about the 2 sentences for a while. She thought about writing a profile, and decided against it, because the profile would require a subject willing to be profiled, and the subject had communicated, with perfect clarity and no discourtesy, that she was not. She thought about writing a piece about force reconnaissance, and the women who had served and continued to serve in adjacent roles, and she decided this was the piece worth writing, not about Renata specifically, but about the wider shape of something that Renata had made visible, briefly, through a 37-second clip in a gym in Fayetteville. She wrote that piece. It ran 3 weeks later. It was longer than the editor initially wanted, and shorter than Claire initially wrote, and the version that published was better than either of them had expected. Several veterans wrote to the publication after it ran. Most of the letters were short and direct. The gym received a final wave of increased inquiry following the piece, somewhat smaller than the wave that had followed the video. Gerald handled it the same way he had handled the video wave, carefully, accurately, and without inflating the story beyond its actual dimensions. He had become, over those weeks, more practiced at declining to elaborate than he was comfortable being, and he made a note to himself to review the gym's communications approach in general, which was something he had put off for 2 years. Renata's mornings continued as they had been. 6:54. Thermos, sign-in system, doors at 7, good morning, and she meant it. The back mat room light, on before anyone else arrived, gone before the first member checked in. 3 weeks after the video, a young woman named Beth came into the gym and asked to speak with someone about the junior training program. She was 22 and was not asking for herself. She was asking for her 12-year-old sister, Margot, who was standing beside her and who was looking at the lobby of the gym, with the particular combination of wanting and nerves that 12-year-olds carry when they are in a new place that matters to them. Renata spoke with both of them. She explained the junior program. She explained the schedule, the cost, the equipment required, the age group Margot would be placed in, and what the first few sessions typically looked like for a new student. She spoke directly to Margot rather than routing everything through Beth, because Margot was the one who was going to be doing the work, and because 12-year-olds are more capable of receiving direct information than most adults give them credit for. Margot asked several questions. They were good questions, clear, specific, and aimed at what she actually wanted to know, rather than at what she thought she was supposed to ask. Renata answered each one. At the end of the conversation, Margot said, "Are you the one in the video?" Renata looked at her. "What video?" Margot looked at her steadily. She did not say anything. She had the look of someone who has recognized when a question has been handled rather than answered, and who has decided to accept the handling. "Okay," Margot said. She looked at her sister. They enrolled her in the junior program that afternoon. Margot showed up the following Thursday for her first session with Greg. She was early. She was in clean gym clothes. She stood near the mat room door and waited for Greg to arrive, and when he did, she said good morning to him before he said it to her. Greg mentioned this to Renata when he came to check the schedule after the session. New student was early and had good manners, he said. "Good," Renata said. "Did you tell her to be early?" "No," Renata said. "I told her to show up." Greg looked at her. He had been coaching kids in this building for 6 years, and he had worked alongside Renata for 9 months. And he had, on the day after the video spread, looked up force reconnaissance on his phone and read about it for an hour, and then sat with what he had read for a while. He had not said anything to Renata about it. He was not sure what there was to say that would not either overstate or understate the thing. He said, "She is going to be good." Renata clicked her pen. "Most of them are, if you give them a real environment." He nodded. He checked the schedule. He went back to his class. In the weeks and then months that followed, the video became a reference rather than a current event. People continued to encounter it for the first time, in the variable way that videos cycle through the internet, and each time a new wave of people saw it, there was a brief rekindling of attention that reached the gym in the form of inquiries and occasional media requests. Gerald had developed a standard response by this point, polished to a single paragraph that was accurate and brief, and disclosed nothing beyond what was already public. Renata did not update her own communication posture. She remained, in the specific terms of how she operated in the building, exactly what she had been before any of it. The person behind the front desk who knew your name, remembered your renewal date, told you honestly when the afternoon class was too full to give you a good training session, and suggested the morning one instead, kept the sign-in sheets in order, and said good morning when you came in, and good evening when you left. There was a change, though, that was subtle and real, and that she herself noticed. The members who had been in the building that afternoon looked at her differently, not with deference, which would have been uncomfortable, and which she did not want, not with self-consciousness, as if they were aware of their own looking, which would have been worse. They looked at her the way people look at something they now see fully, having previously seen it only partially. It was not a dramatic change. It was a degree of attention, a fraction more present than before, that did not ask anything from her, and did not cost her anything, and simply existed in the room alongside the regular business of the day. She found this acceptable. She had not needed it. She had not been waiting for it. But she found, on the mornings when it was present in the lobby, that the room felt like what she had come here to find, a regular place, with regular people, doing regular work, in which she was also a regular person doing regular work, known for the work rather than for something separate from it. That was the life she had built. That was what it felt like when it was running correctly. On a Wednesday in the 4th month after the video, Gerald knocked on the frame of the open supply closet where Renata was taking inventory and asked if she had a few minutes. She did. They sat in his office. He had printed a single page and had it on the desk. He explained that he was proposing a change to her role, a senior staff position with oversight of the front desk operations and a modest salary increase, and he pushed the page toward her so she could see the numbers. She read the page. She looked at Gerald. "Is this based on the video?" she said. "No," Gerald said. He said it plainly, and with the directness of someone who has anticipated the question and prepared an honest answer. "It is based on 9 months of watching you run this desk, better than anyone has run it since I opened this building. The video changed what other people know about you. It did not change what I already knew about you. Renata looked at the page again. She said, I would like to think about it. Of course, Gerald said. She thought about it for 48 hours. She thought about it on the drive home that evening, and over coffee at her kitchen table the next morning, and while driving to her sister's house on Sunday. Her sister, whose name was Kay, and who had 2 dogs and direct opinions about most things, listened to the description of the offer and said, Take it. You have been undervaluing yourself your whole life, and you know it. Renata said, That is not an accurate characterization. It is from where I sit, Kay said. The dogs agreed with Kay, or at least they were unable to disagree, being currently engaged in competing for the same toy in the corner. Renata looked at them. She drank her coffee. She called Gerald on Monday morning and accepted the position. She said the salary was acceptable. She said she would need the front desk management procedures to be formally documented so that whoever covered her when she took time off would have clear guidance. Gerald said that was reasonable. She said she would write the documentation herself because it would be faster and more accurate than asking someone else to do it. He said he had expected she would say that. They concluded the conversation. She put the phone down. She picked up her pen. She clicked it once. The front door of the gym opened. The first member of the morning came through it, a man named Paul who was 63 years old, and who had been training at this gym 4 mornings a week for 2 years, and who had, by Renata's observation, improved in every measurable dimension of his fitness in that time, which she found quietly satisfying, in the same way she found many things about this job quietly satisfying, the way systems work when people work them honestly. Paul signed in. He pushed the sheet back. He picked up his bag. Good morning, Renata, he said. Good morning, Paul, she said. How is the shoulder? Better this week, he said. Good, she said. Tell Greg if it gives you trouble during the warm-up. He said he would. He walked toward the training floor. She entered his check-in into the system. She moved to the next item on the morning list. The thermos was warm on her side of the counter. The window was showing the parking lot in early morning light, empty except for 5 cars including her own, parked near the back where the spaces were easier. The sign-in sheet was clean. Tomorrow's was already printed and waiting in the drawer below. Everything was in order. Everything was, in the specific and sufficient sense of the word, fine. She had chosen this. She had chosen it with the same care she brought to every decision, which was the care of someone who has been in enough situations where decisions matter at a level most people never experience, and who has therefore learned that decisions at every level are worth making with full attention, including, and especially the ones that look small from the outside. The gym filled steadily as the morning continued. Footsteps, bag sounds, the baseline hum of a functioning space, Greg's voice in the far room, steady and clear, working through a warm-up routine with a class. The phone rang twice. She answered it twice. Both times she answered it on the second ring. The door opened again. She looked up. She said good morning. She meant it. She had always meant it. Every single morning to every single person who came through that door, she had meant it. That was not a small thing. In her experience, the capacity to mean a small thing completely, without reduction, every day that it was required, was not a quality most people developed or sustained. It required a particular relationship with the ordinary, a willingness to find the ordinary worth the full weight of your attention, day after day, without the ordinary needing to become extraordinary to earn it. She had found that relationship on the far side of extraordinary things. She had carried it back with her. She was spending it here, at this desk, on these mornings, on the people who came through this door and trusted someone to be present when they arrived. She clicked her pen. She turned back to the screen. The chair squeaked. She did not notice.